everybody, and welcome to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Today is Wednesday, July 30th, aka the day we've been waiting for months. It is New York Liberty versus Minnesota Lynx tonight. My name is Chelsea Lay, and I am joined by Coach Helen Williams, for our weekly chat here on the podcast. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to hit that button below and check us out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening, and check us out on social media. You can mention us, yell at us, comment on whatever we say at Her Hoop Stats on X, BlueSky, Instagram, as well as on herhoopstats.com. But Coach, we are in a time that we have just been waiting for. It feels like we've been waiting for this day forever. Minnesota versus New York tonight. How does it feel to be here?
Well, finally, and I'm just wondering, like, who does the schedule? I'm sure it's computer generated, but
Yeah.
you've got to put in some parameters or something that will make this type of game happen earlier in the season.
Mm-hmm. And it's like the disappointing part, and we're going to preview the game. That's kind of the first half of our pod here today. But the sad part is that we're at the point of the season now where injuries are starting to, rack up. And unfortunately, that means we're not going to have a full health New York versus Minnesota game, which I feel like a lot of people after the chaos of the WNBA finals last fall would have loved to see, like a fully healthy, what can these teams do at full strength kind of game. And that's just not what we're getting tonight.
Yeah, the press release says that Burke is out, Stewart is out, Sobley is out, and
Natasha Cloud
is questionable with an illness, whatever that means. So,
yeah,
you hate to see that because it's going to be hard to get a barometer on what we're going to see and what we assume is going to be a preview to the WNBA finals. But at the same time, if I'm a coach, I'm like, okay, this just gives me an opportunity to play around with some lineups, see what I have. Emma Meesseman is in town. She's not playing tonight, but, that'll be a part in the coming weeks of just trying to figure out what lineups play well together, give them some time to develop some chemistry, and what I've always talked about, the bench, give them some real time, experience together and figure out what's going to work well for them.
Yeah, of course. Like you said, Emma Meesseman not signed yet, still waiting for her visa kind of application to be 100% through before they sign her, but she has committed to New York and she seems to be in town, ready to join the team whenever they allow her.
Somebody's sitting there with a pen going, hurry up, hurry up.
I know, literally. They're like sitting there with the e-document, like up, ready, chasing, like just following her with the pen so that when they get the call, they can sign on the dotted line. But yeah, I mean, so we're not going to see New York at, what it will be eventually. And hopefully when the Lynx and the Liberty play each other like 7 times in the next 2 weeks, one of those times Emma Meesseman will be able to play. But yeah, it's like you have to see what you're like without Stewie. They've lost 2 games in a row now. So that is definitely something that's going to be on their mind today. You have to see how Jonquel Jones is going to step up, how Sabrina Ionescu is going to step up without Natasha Cloud on the court if she ends up not playing. I have a feeling that would probably be like a game time decision depending on what illness she seems to have. But yeah, it's just like an interesting thing where I could see Minnesota taking it, obviously, because they're the healthier team. They are the team with the most, I would say, like revenge on the table, given the last time that we saw these two play each other. But at the same time, New York also wants to prove themselves as the rightful back-to-back favorites. And so I have a feeling Sabrina Ionescu is going to have a great game as well because she has, she got fired up during those games last year during the finals. So there's just so many storylines to think about. And you said it, the bench is going to be huge. And I feel like the players who didn't work on the team last year, like maybe they will have a special impact as well because they maybe have a little bit more of a motivation to want to win the championship too because they didn't win it last year.
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this from the beginning of our broadcast this season, is the bench is going to be key. And at the beginning of the season, I said New York has the best bench in the league. And then I said later, Minnesota's starting to play better. But really, when I'm looking at benches, I'm looking at, do you have at least four people that could potentially be in a starting lineup and be competitive against other teams in the league. That to me says you have a really deep bench. And right now with New York, I think they have that. I'm not saying they could beat all the teams in the league, but they could be competitive as part of a starting five as a group. So it'll be interesting to see what Minnesota does in the future. They're going to have to make some move. I don't know what it's going to be, but before that trade deadline's over, they're going to have to make a move if they want to compete. I think with New York, if only the five players that they have, the starters for Minnesota, played and they stayed healthy and never got in foul trouble, then obviously they would be have an opportunity to win the championship. But you need depth if you're going to win a championship.
Yeah, and I mean, we kind of seem to the point we're about to hit August. The trade deadline is August 7th. Minnesota has been a team that has been active at the trade deadline in years past. And so, it kind of feels like we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop and waiting for the announcement to come out, say whatever the Lynx are going to do. But going back to, I mean, Minnesota just lost a game against Atlanta recently. And it was rough in the fact that Fee scored, I mean, like 30 plus points. She played fantastic, but Bridget Carlton didn't score any. Kayla McBride didn't score any. And so, like, those shooting offensive players that you need in order to step up against these really strong offensive teams need to, contribute a little bit more. Do you think that's going to be a factor tonight against New York? And that might be something New York can take advantage of?
Yeah, I think for Minnesota, depending on what they do with the trade line, the quote unquote others are going to be so important for them in terms of the people that you just mentioned, in terms of depth. I think that Nafisa Collier is going to do Nafisa Collier. She's just like Asia Wilson with Las Vegas. She is going to be on point on both ends of the floor on a consistent basis. It's what everybody else does if they come to play. If Courtney Williams shoots well, that's going to be a big deal. Kayla McBride, I think, is going to be key and Bridget Carlton too, in terms of spreading out the defense. Because I think New York, they have a lot of long, lanky players, and I think where they struggle is when you have quick ball handlers who can get their shoulders past those defenders and get downhill. That's where they struggle, and so that's not going to happen unless they shoot really well. In order, for people to come out and play them, so they can when they run them off the line, they go downhill.
Yeah. So given all of this, and given the fact that those people are out for the Liberty, do you still think this is a Minnesota win, or do you think the Liberty have a chance to, come out victorious?
Here's what I will say as a coach: it matters because it's a game, and you want to stay up there with in the top two spots. But in the grand scheme of things, on some levels it doesn't matter. You're just trying to see where you are, and it's just one game. And I don't want the fans to freak out on either side, depending on who wins, who loses. I wouldn't read too much into this game. I'm excited for it finally, but by the same token, it's just one game. They've got to play each other a gazillion times more, and really we don't. It's hard to make any judgments right now because it's so early, and Minnesota still hasn't made whatever moves they're going to make.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the first of, I believe, 4 total games. I like to exaggerate and say like 7 or 10, but it's 4 games.
I know when you said 7, I was like, 7?
No, I was just being dramatic. No, so they'll play each other 4 times in the month of August. Technically, we're still in July, but within the next like 30-ish days, and maybe a little bit more, they'll play each other. I believe at one point, I forget which way it goes, but one of these teams plays the other 3 times in a row, like with no other teams in between. So it is literally a mini series. The other team has another game slotted in there, so they have 4 games in a short amount of time. One is this matchup, then they play someone else, and then back to back again. But yeah, it gets to the point where, and I know we've talked about this, earlier on in the season, where the scouts become, very intense. You figure out how you're going to play someone because you've played them before, and it gets more and more intense every time. So it's hard to really predict, like, and especially with injuries and stuff coming up every day, it seems like
Yeah.
exactly what each game is going to look like and what the key factors are going to be each time they play each other.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for both teams to develop a plan A, B, C, and D,
Mm.
in terms of who's out there, what lineups they have, how are you going to play them, what works, what doesn't work. It'll be interesting to see what the in-game adjustments are, and then the game-to-game adjustments. Again, depending on who's available, for both teams. And this is practice for the postseason. Again, you definitely want to win games. I'm not saying you don't want to win games, but again, don't fans do not read too much into this. Don't panic if your team doesn't win.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, that's exactly right. Especially again, when you think about how many times they're going to play each other. It's just at the end of the day, obviously, you want to get the season series because that has somewhat implications when it comes to the end of the series or to the season. But at the same time, especially this game, because it's the first one, I think they're just going to be sussing each other out a little bit more than anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just I went back and I looked at the stats, and they're so close on so many different stats, team stats during the season. But
Yeah.
as I said, I don't know what broadcast we did, but like the defense is going to be really, really important. I think just
Mhm.
the points off turnovers, the second chance points, like that's allowing teams to offensive rebound and having more opportunities to score. I think that's going to be important. The percentage of points that teams get from the free throw line, which again goes back to what I was talking about earlier, allowing people to get downhill and having to help and recover those things, or those are the things that I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, thinking about coaching, let's kind of switch gears a little bit, thinking about coaches in the league. Obviously, coaching in this matchup is going to be so important, and Sandy Brondello and Cheryl Reeve are up there in terms of best coaches in the league. But you have a little bit of a ongoing, I guess, list of coaches that you think maybe in the running for coach of the year. We were talking about how it is a little bit early to say, give a big prediction, especially this season where everyone is so close, and everything is so kind of still up in the air in terms of who's going to make the playoffs and who isn't. But let's talk about coaches that you think have, should be in that conversation, let's say. And it's been a great season for coaching, especially when you think about new first time WNBA head coaches who have come in to the league. But let's talk about the kind of more, let's say, veteran coaches that we have on this list. So you have Sandy Brondello, Reeve, and Nate Tibbetts. And then you also, so then on the other hand, you have Sydney Johnson at Washington. And then you have Natalie Nakase and Carl Smesco, who are also first time coaches as well. So let's start with the more tenured coaches in Brondello, Reeve, and Tibbetts, at least in the W. I know these coaches have, long coaching careers in other leagues and in college and etc. But let's just talk in terms of the W. So for those three, and we can hit them one by one as well. But what makes it so they just continue to be able to be in this conversation?
Well, I think that the consistent excellence of Brondello and Coach Reed gets lost. People take that for granted, and they go, "Oh, they have the players." Now, you're not a great coach if you don't have great players, right? Because you don't win. But I think the ability of both of these coaches to take that talent and get them to buy into a system and to be unselfish and to be the best at whatever role the coach decides for them is so underrated. And you have to give these players credit for being unselfish and just wanting to be part of the big picture and win. Now, Cheryl Reeve has 4 championships. Sandy Brondello has 2, so we know they can coach. And I think still, even they should be in consideration, and people not take their consistent excellence for granted. If you look at Nate Tibbetts, it's not that people thought that Phoenix was going to be bad. It's just that we didn't know what they had. We weren't sure. We didn't know who was what. The names weren't familiar with the veteran quote unquote rookies, and so no one was really sure. And I think for them, people are talking about them, but I also think they're just like, okay, Phoenix is good. Maybe they'll be in the finals. Maybe they'll compete. And it's just, yeah, we're talking about them, but we know it's going to be New York and we know it's going to be Minnesota. And so I think people take that they're not sometimes taking them serious enough. It's like your little brother or little sister. Yeah, yeah, they're pretty decent, but they're little brother, little sister.
Yeah, and I mean, you're so right. I feel like sometimes people get lost in the fact that, oh, like Cheryl Reeve has won 4 championships, or oh, that's just how she is. It's just how they are. And I think like how they are is one thing, but if how you are is consistently at the top of the standings, consistently, even there was like a couple of season stretch there where Minnesota wasn't at the top of the standings. And the way that they were able to so quickly correct when it usually takes franchises years to kind of go through that cycle of rebuilding and kind of getting back to that playoff spot. For Minnesota, it didn't take that long. And then you think about Sandy Brondello really just being the factor that took New York from that team that was on the edge of doing something really great to just fully being in that championship conversation every single year. I think she has, a lot to do with that as well. Let's kind of flip to these first year coaches in the W. So Natalie Nakase, Smesko, and Johnson. Let's start with Natalie Nakase because she is kind of in a unique situation where she is coaching an expansion team in the Golden State Valkyries. Obviously was a high assistant for Becky Hammon at the Aces for quite a while and has like a long career in coaching, G League, men's basketball, women's basketball, college basketball, all that stuff. So she has a ton of experience, but this is her first time head coaching. And so what has impressed you from Natalie Nakase and the Golden State Valkyries that makes you want to put her in this conversation?
Well, first of all, it's literally like an inch difference between that assistant coach chair and moving
Yeah.
over to that head coaching chair in terms of distance, but in
Yeah.
terms of experience, it's just, cavernous, just huge. It's a lot different when you're making those decisions. I know when I was an assistant, it was like, I don't understand why she's doing that. I'm going to do this, and this. When I get to be a head coach, that's wrong. I wouldn't do it this way. I would do it that way. And then you get in the chair and you're like, oh, that's why she did this, or that's why he's going with it this way, or this play, or whatever. And so you do have to sit in that chair to get a visceral understanding of what it takes to be the person who's making all the decisions. So I give her credit for that because it goes way beyond X's and O's. She got a group of people who other teams said, you're expendable, right? And we like you, but we'd rather keep these other people. You can be in the expansion draft. And to get those players who were not players that were the woman, quote unquote, on their team to come and play together. And in some cases, I'll give Veronica Burton as an example. I thought she was a really good defender and that her offense was just okay. But here she is, scoring for them. And then you get Xander Lassini, who hit the shot last night to help them win against Atlanta. Unfortunately, Thornton is hurt now for the rest of the season, but somehow she and her staff are getting that team to play together and play hard. That has been their hallmark. And so even with that, still they're trying to see if they're going to make the playoffs. But that's what's impressed me most is she's taken a group of people who really were not, quote unquote, dependent on a lot for their teams. And now they have these expanded roles and they've done well in those expanded roles.
Yeah, it feels like the plot to like every sports movie that came out in the 90s and early 2000s where it's like ragtag group of athletes, nobody else wants them. Coach comes in and it's like, they end up making the playoffs of the championship game or whatever. For the Valkyries, it would be making the playoffs because nobody expected them to even be in contention for the playoffs. I think there was this big idea that they would hang around kind of the 12th, 13th spot in the standings. And instead they're out here beating teams, championship level teams that are here in a playoff spot or fighting for a playoff spot. And they have maybe the most intimidating home court advantage in the league at the moment. I mean, Toronto's going to give them a run for their money.
I was waiting for the homer I was just waiting for the Homer statement to come in. But
Yay.
to your point, that whole organization has set a high bar for anybody that's coming in.
Yep.
And one of the ways that as a head coach, you want an organization that gives you everything you need to be successful. You got to give credit to the GM for getting the players that they have, and making those decisions, small things but big things, like the locker room and the practice facility, and this being a place now where free agents, 80% of players next year are going to be free. That's a place where they want to go because they've experienced playing there and they've seen the home crowd. And so you
Yeah.
have to give the organization. That's a big part of why of how a head coach can be successful. You need that.
Yeah. And I mean, small tangent from the conversation, but thinking about how many expansion teams we're going to get in the next 5 years from the WNBA, in your opinion, like what should these franchises prioritize when it comes to hiring their very first head coach?
That's such a subjective thing. It depends on what your priorities are, right?
Mhm.
You obviously want to win, but I think more than anything, you want a coach who has the ability to build relationships and get players to buy in. Because
Mhm.
the X's and O's don't matter if you don't have players that can buy in. And so being able to communicate with your players in a way that works for them, because everybody processes information in a different way. So if you're coaching and you're trying to get a point across, is your athlete an auditory learner? Is your athlete a kinesthetic learner? Is your athlete a do they learn with their eye, a visual learner, right?
Mm.
So understanding that piece and being able to develop those relationships, and then navigating, making sure that you get the right assistants, right? We see in a case where Vegas lost both their assistants. They're struggling now. I'm not saying that's the only reason they struggle, but that's an underrated piece that a whole lot of people aren't talking about in
Yeah.
terms of success. So it really depends on what your priorities are, but you got to have a good communicator who doesn't have an ego but has enough of a presence where when they walk into a room and they say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, people are going to buy in.
Yeah. I agree. And yeah, it's hard because you need to balance finding a good coach who also wants to be in this new place, who also can make those relationships and be the face of a franchise and be the person who takes a lot of flack. Like Nakase took a lot of flack at the beginning of the season for the decision she was making in terms of the roster, and people were so confused as to what she was doing. And then now look at them. I mean, they again are ninth in the league right now, but are playing for a playoff spot. And I think that is just like a testament to, like, she has a vision and she's doing it and she's committing to it, and she seems to like know what she wants to do. And it's working out so far, which is great. I mean, in this great experiment of expansion and setting the blueprint for everybody else. But let's kind of flip now into another coach that I think people had a little bit of confusion going into the beginning of this season with, but again has performed really well, which was Carl Smesko coming in from college, deciding to come into the Atlanta Dream. I mean, I don't think people were confused when he was hired. I think it was more when they started making roster moves and kind of figuring out who was going to be on the roster and how they were going to play within his system. But I mean, obviously, because he's on this list, he has done a good job in your eyes. So, what has impressed you about Carl Smesko in the Atlanta Dream?
I think just him adapting to the roster that he had. I'm not quite sure when he came in, but I think the roster was set for the most part. You'll have to correct me on that if I'm wrong, but
I think it was
being
before
able
free agency.
okay, so being able to take what you have and adapt to your system, and quite honestly, giving players the confidence, whether they're good 3-point shooters or not,
Yeah.
to just let it fly. And because he's given them the confidence, some of his players think they're 3-point shooters, and so they're making 3-point shots, and
Yep.
it's working for him. But I also think his in-game adjustments are good, and he has with Ryan, shoot her last name, Ryan Howard
Yes.
being out. a couple of times. I think he's done a really good job of integrating Walker Kimbrough. I think he's done a really good job of integrating Maya Caldwell and being able to elevate the game of Alicia Gray and the the play of Brianna Jones. I was watching them, and people don't realize how hard she runs. They always talk about how strong she is, and she's doing this, that, and the other, but she runs the floor hard for somebody her size. And so, figuring out who to play when, what adjustments to make in game. The only thing that they have to do is they got to stop losing these games at the end of the game. They lost to Golden State last night, and again, Zandalashini, just love her, love her.
Mhm.
But they've got to stop losing these games that they should win. But that's part of why I think he's done a great job there.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help when you get distracted at the end of the game. But yeah, I think and we'll cut that conversation there. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think, late game execution is something that this team has struggled with the entire season. You think back to those first few games when they were really, really strong, and then they kind of ended up, losing to, I think Washington was one of the first games they played where they ended up losing late in the game. And that has just kind of carried throughout the rest of the season. But you're right. I mean, Alicia Gray's having a season where I think we all knew she was this kind of player, but being able to really, show that, but also be on a team that is in kind of a higher playoff position as opposed to where Atlanta has been over the past few years, which is not necessarily that, is huge. And I think, if we flip to another team that, again, zero expectations this season, but has really impressed, I think I can see why Sydney Johnson is on your list, just given the fact that the Washington Mystics have just really, again, in different circumstances than the Valkyries, of course, in terms of why there was no expectations for this roster. But I mean, they've just surpassed everything that you thought they were going to be. And I know a lot of that is the young members of the team, but I mean, I think it's also the fact that they shook things up in this offseason and changed a lot of their personnel as well. And it's hard to just like hit the ground running and be able to win when you do that as well. So I mean, yeah, the Washington Mystics have been fantastic. I'm curious if your thoughts differ at all from mine as to why you would include their coach on the list.
No, well, first of all, there's no minimum age on talent. So
Yeah.
the rookies, I think, have come in and done a tremendous job. And I think I'm a big fan, obviously, of the Princeton elements. Anytime I watch them play, I get excited about that. But I didn't really know a whole lot about him when it was
Mhm.
announced that he was going to be the head coach. And so I reserved judgment at the beginning of the season because I didn't want to say anything because I didn't know. But I think he's done a great job. And it's also another example of, when you become a head coach, hiring the right staff,
Yeah.
because that staff has done a great job in teaching those young players how to play the game. The general manager done a great job of getting veterans that are taking these young players under their wing and teaching them how to be professionals and how to play the game. And then I'm going to give a shout out to the trainers for getting Shakira Austin ready, healthy, and ready to play, because that's been a
Yeah.
big made a big difference for them, to so much to the point where they're trying to decide whether or not they're going to trade Aaliyah
Yeah.
from the team by the seventh. So they're just a combination of things, but I think he's done a good job, and you can see that his players enjoy playing for him. And
Mhm.
so yeah, those are some of the reasons why he will. I don't think he'll win Coach of the Year, but I think he needs to be in consideration for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think Oh, sorry, I just heard myself echo a little bit, which is why I kinda stopped talking there. But anyway, I agree. I think, the Mystics, they're in a tough place right now, and I think that's why they've been trying to debate whether or not to trade for Leah Edwards, because when you think about, and nobody knows what the expansion draft rules are going to be in a few months. I mean, Kathy Engelbert just said at the All-Star game that they haven't really locked in if it's gonna be the exact same as last year, but last year play or teams could protect 6 players. And when you think about the 6 players that Washington would protect, you kind of have a few on the bubble there of, do you want to keep these veterans that, are a huge part of your success? Do you want to kind of lock in on the younger players? Who do you kind of let free? And if they do make it so that Aaliyah Edwards is available for expansion draft, I mean, not for the fact that it's her hometown team that is going to be drafting that could pick her up in Toronto, but she's just such a talented player that if Toronto decided for some weird reason they didn't pick her up, I think Portland would immediately jump on that as well. And so do you debate like getting rid of her now and getting something back for her so you don't just lose her in the expansion draft when she is still under contract for next season? Or do you just see what happens, or do you let someone else be unprotected? Do you wait and see what the rules are? It's kind of a weird situation to be in because obviously they don't want to give her up in terms of, she's really talented player. She brings a lot when she does get minutes on the floor. But at the same time, there's so many factors going into this offseason that you have to think about. And it's hard when you don't really know what the standards or the rules or the situation is going to look like.
Yeah, I think those points are well taken, but you have to also consider you've got Georgia Amore,
Yes.
rehabbing. She'll be back, so they're not going to let her go. I would
No.
assume. And then also, 80% of the players are going to be free agents.
Yeah.
And then you've got obviously the teams have shown, especially teams like Golden State, how important the European players are. And so you have to, at this point, if you're a general manager, you're taking all that into consideration to figure out what you're going to do by August the 7th. And that's a lot. You need a plan A, B, C, and D as well.
Really.
You should already be working on what you're going to do for next year. But the trades on August 7th are going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's there's definitely teams who could make moves, and I think that would justify it in terms of players that are still on contract for next year. Because you think about all these rookies who are on 4-year, like rookie scale contracts, so there will be a fair amount of players on contract when it comes to younger players. And then, you think of the Georgia Amores that, Washington is going to want to keep. You think of draft picks and draft rights that can be traded around. That is another big factor next year going into what is looking like.
Yeah, think about that. That's a great point. Great point.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I think with the trade deadline coming up in about a week, it's I wouldn't be surprised if some big things happen within the next 7 days.
Yeah, and I think once that happens, we'll get a better bead on where we think teams will finish at the end of the year in terms of, all right, this is our team. We're not making any more changes now. Now, what do we do now? How will we look for the rest of the season? So there are a lot of things people are talking about that may not matter after August 7th.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. But any last thoughts on this whole coaching, coach of the year award situation? I know awards aren't kind of the be all and end all of, existing in the WNBA, but they are, a good conversation point as we get into the second half of the season.
Yeah, obviously won't be decided till the end, but just the nature of the voting and how people think it. If you're Natalie Nacaste, Sydney Johnson, like I said, you should be in the conversation, but I don't think that they would win. But stranger things have happened. And then you have Nate Tibbetts as well. But I think those, Reeve and Brondello and Tibbetts will be like your top three. But, we don't know. We don't know. And it depends on who's voting and what their rationale is, what their parameters are. Do you just vote because the teams win and that's easy, or do you dive deeper and look at really what they're doing in terms of what they have with their roster? It's not an award where people go, man, her team wasn't very good, but she did a heck of a job, getting them to be competitive. So it really depends.
Yeah. All right, before we head out, let's just kind of take a look at the games going on tonight. Of course, we already previewed New York versus Minnesota, which is tonight at 8, but there are 2 other games going on, and they are kind of also
at the same time?
Kind of, yeah. We have Phoenix versus Indiana, which is going to be a very exciting game given where both of those teams are. Of course, Caitlin Clark is still out indefinitely, but so that is at 7 o'clock, and then at 8 o'clock, which is at the same time as the New York Minnesota game, you have Atlanta versus Dallas. Dallas just got a big win the other day on a huge game from Arike and Paige together. So nice to see that chemistry coming together as well. So that's going to be a very interesting game as well, given the dynamics of both of those teams, and just the way that those Dallas players have been improving lately.
Yeah, so we talked a long time ago about giving Coach K some time, and are the social media people who can't make free throws, are they still not happy with him in terms of the job that he's doing? Obviously, they are much more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Enrique's playing, getting more opportunities. Again, I think that Lee Rue has made a huge difference for them in terms of
Yeah.
opening up their offense and allowing Paige and Enrique to operate. So I don't think he's on the hot seat anymore. But we said that give it some time. It was a little shaky there at the beginning, but yes, they've definitely improved. So it'll be, I think, a really good game. Atlanta's coming off a loss, so how will they? They don't have Ryan Howard, so how will they bounce back after the loss last night?
Yeah, and I mean, if Dallas is able to win, they're at 8 wins right now. The next team ahead of them is Los Angeles at 11 wins. So if they win, and they're only about 3 games outside of getting into that next tier of standings, I think that could be a huge motivator for them going into August and seeing if they can try to make some sort of run or to get a few more wins so they're not just like hanging at the bottom with the Chicagos and the Connecticuts of the league. Because they're kind of in the middle right now of that lower last tier and that kind of middle tier of those teams that are really trying to make a playoff push. So, I mean, if anything, it would be great for their confidence just to kind of get a few more wins going here.
Yeah, this is, again, after August the 7th, you're going to be what you're going to be in terms of roster. And so I think we'll have a better beat on where teams are going to sort of finish or have an opportunity. It's going to be a tight race to make the top team so that you can get in the playoffs. But as you said, it's just all bunched up there right now, and everybody still has a chance.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that is going to be where we call it for today's episode of the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Thanks, of course, Coach, for coming to join me. As always, it's fun to kind of chat and get your thoughts on things. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the Her Hoop Stats podcast wherever you're listening or watching right now. And we will see you tomorrow for another episode.